This week we're going to go over some commands that are going to help you to edit your drawing and also to start to introduce blocks. So the first commands that I want to introduce are the layer isolate command and the layer unisolate command. And the tool buttons for those are up above, okay, under the layers palette here. And what this does is it allows for us to be able to isolate the layers, turn them on and off if we ever need to change anything, because what happens is that when we start to work with AutoCAD, we could have lines that are on top of each other, or we have, might have objects that intersect each other and we can't figure out what's what. Okay, so what happens is with the layer unisolate, well, the layer isolate and the unisolate, is that we can isolate these layers and work on that layer specifically. So if I type in LAYISO, okay, and again the buttons are up here, it's going to allow me to select an object at the layers on the layer to be isolated. So for example, if I want to work with my walls, I can click on that wall and hit enter. And what it does is it basically turns everything else off. Okay, this isn't particularly a setting that I like. So if I go to undo and I type in LAYISO again, down below you have your settings. Okay, and I actually prefer to turn my layers off. Okay, I think visually it just makes it a lot easier to work with. So I'm going to again go through those settings, and then it'll allow me to select that layer again. And I'm going to hit click on the object that has for that layer, hit enter, and it's going to turn everything else off. So basically what I can do is I can go through, I can start to edit out information. This looks pretty good. Okay, but say there's something I need to fix, I can fix it. And then when I'm ready to turn all my layers back on again, if I type in lay uniso, which is unisolate, it'll turn everything back on again. Okay, so it's a really quick way of starting to turn things on and off so that I can start to, edit or fix my drawing without having to go through some of the, freezing the layers or turning the layers off, which we'll go through in, a later lesson when we start to, work with our layers more. The other thing that I want to show you is the mirror command. Okay, and the mirror command, what it does is it essentially flips information from one side of an axis to another. Okay, so really in all its simplicity is if I create a circle, okay, and I want to mirror that circle, okay, I'm going to select my circle, and then it's going to ask me, once I select my object, okay, or objects, it allows me to do more than one object. If I hit enter, it's going to ask me to specify a first point of the mirror line. So what I'm doing is I'm defining the axis about which I'm going to mirror this object. Okay, so I can be, if I click on my base point, okay, or my first point, it's going to ask me for a second point, but until I do, you can see how that axis is defined and what the result would be. Okay, and this is where we should start to, really work with our object snaps and with our ortho, because that's going to give us the greater accuracy. Okay, so if I turn on F8, or if I go down and make sure that my ortho mode is on, okay, I'm going to snap it to a 90 degree. So if I click, it's going to ask me if I want to erase my source objects, meaning if I want to keep both of them, I say no. If I want to get rid of my original object, I'm going to hit yes. Okay, the default is no, so that if I hit enter, it's going to keep both of them and it's going to exit me out of the command. Okay, so, it involves a little bit of playing around with. Again, you can do either one object or multiple objects, but it is a really good tool along with our other modified tools in order to get tasks done quickly. So if I select those objects and hit enter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my plan, and I want to introduce this concept of blocks. Now, blocks is a tool to further help us to organize our drawings. And it's specifically referred to as a block, okay, when we start to work with AutoCAD. So a block is essentially a number of objects that are saved together in order to form one entity. So usually blocks are used for complex shapes, which is furniture, fixtures, etc., in order to create an easier workflow. So instead of having to redraft or having to select a large number of individual objects, you can copy, move, or erase the blocks as if they were one object. Blocks are also useful if you have multiples of one object. So for example, doors. Once one block is created and copied, okay, if you need to change it, all you have to do is make changes to that original block object. And that's, all of them just kind of contain that information. So I don't have to figure out where the original one is, but I can just select one of the blocks. And if I update that, it'll update throughout all the blocks. So blocks can either be defined within a drawing, okay, they can be exported from a drawing, or a separate file can be inserted as a block into a file. So defining blocks within the current drawing. To define a block, okay, we can access the block command, okay, and it's going to allow us the options in order to create a block. But right now I haven't defined what my objects are, so I'm going to cancel out of this. And what this tool is especially useful for is if I'm working with a furniture piece that I'm going to use multiple times, or if I have any information that's going to repeat. So let's say I'm going to create a chair. Okay, so quickly I'm just going to create, and I'm literally doing this off the fly. Okay, so I'm not using any specific dimensions, okay, although I should, because I should make my, I should make my, I'm using the mirror command here, okay, but I should make my drawings obviously as accurate as possible, okay, but for brevity's sake, I'm just going to make something up quickly. Okay, so this is essentially, I don't know, a stool that I created. Okay, so I'm going to type in block, and the block the definition pops up. Okay, and it's a separate window. Just to cancel out of this one more time. Okay, you can also create, and edit your blocks using the block palette. Okay, under the home ribbon. Okay, so either way, I'm going to type in block or B, and a pop-up window appears with the title block definition. Okay, so this basically gives us the main options for defining a name, a base point, and selecting the objects which will be part of the block. So what's important is that you draw the objects, when you do draw the objects, that the objects are in layer 0. Okay, and this is one of those few times where it's extremely important to understand this concept and to work with layer 0. So this is because once we create the block, what happens is that we'll insert it on its proper layer. Okay, so for example, if this is a furniture piece, I'm going to insert it on the furniture layer, and it'll take on the properties of that layer. Okay, and that's because the original block objects are drawn on layer 0, and that's why they have to be drawn on layer 0. And I'll go through an example of why. Okay, so first what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in, let's say, round chair. Okay, and you try to make sure that your blocks are something that you can recognize over and over again. My base point, I'm going to specify it on screen. Okay, or actually, sorry, I'm going to pick a point. Okay, and what this does is it defines the insertion point, okay, for the block. So this is where your object snaps become important, because you have to ask yourself, am I going to do it at the center? Am I going to insert it, using a midpoint? So you'll see that it changes from shape to shape. Now I find that with circles, I always use the center. Okay, so I'm going to specify my center as the base point, and I'm going to click, and it'll record that information and bring me back into my block definition. So now what I need to do is I need to select my objects, and I'm going to select all of my objects that are going to be my block. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see that now there's a little icon of it. What we also, have to be mindful of is, sometimes if we don't want to, we'll go through this, we can allow exploding. Okay, so sometimes if we don't want something to follow the rest of the blocks, we can explode it into the original objects. And we can also make it annotative. And when we learn about annotation scale, this is an important thing to remember, that blocks can also be annotative, and I'll mention it then. So once I do that, I can hit OK. Okay, so now when I select it, you can see that now it's one singular object. And I can take this, okay, I can even erase the original one. I can mirror it. I can, copy them. I can rotate them. Now let's take this guy. So I can start to play around with him a little bit. Okay, so as I said, it's very, very helpful when you're using the same thing and you're just copying and pasting it all over the place. Okay, so what I need to do is, first of all, I'm going to explode this block. Okay, so now it's the original objects. And the reason why I do that is to show you, kind of how these blocks are connected to each other and how they can save time. So, what I can also, just to back up for 1 second, I can either create the block in here, okay, or what I can do is once it's within my file, okay, I can actually, insert it. So, for example, I can, delete all of these, these blocks, and to get it back again, okay, as long as I don't purge out my drawing, and we'll talk about purging later on, if I type in insert, okay, or the insert button is up here, that has all my blocks in it, okay, but we'll go back and we'll type in insert, you can see that there's a list of blocks that I have in my file. So I can go find round chair, and this is why it's important to name it something that you can find, and I can hit OK, and it'll insert the same thing. Okay, so what I want to do, and this is where I kind of stopped off, last time before we went into insert, but what I want to do is I want to edit it. Okay, so say my client wants to change the furniture piece, okay, or wants to change something about it. So the key advantage in using blocks lies not only in the fact that they allow you to copy and move a large number of otherwise separate objects as one entity, but also that blocks give you the opportunity to be edited. Okay, so upon editing a block within a drawing, all instances of this block are updated automatically. So this editing takes place in the block editor, which is accessed by double-clicking on the block or the command bedit. Okay, and you can see that's up above here, with the rest of the block commands. So when I do that, okay, and usually I just double-click on it. I find that to be easy. I find my round chair and I get hit OK. Okay, so what this does is the model space changes to a gray background and a new toolbar appears, and all that is visible in model space is whatever belongs to that block that you choose to edit. So at this stage you can add or delete any object that you desire to the block. Okay, so I call this kind of bizarro block editing world because it looks like model space, but it's not really model space. Okay, it's really for editing this block. Okay, and you don't really know that you're in it, okay, because the colors change a little bit. Okay, but you always have to make sure that you're mindful, okay, of where you are when you start to work with the block editing world, and as we'll see later on, the XREF editing world. Okay, and those are my that's my terminology. So let's say my client wanted to change this from a hard stool. Okay, it might look like a hard stool now, and I want to change it to what looks like a plush stool. So if I click on Home, and I just start to add, what might look like pillowing, and I start to change the block. Okay, and again, I'm doing it very, very loosely. Okay, just using the tools that we've already learned. And I can, let's say, offset this 1 inch. Maybe make a hollow back. Make sure I get rid of my little pieces that might come from my trimming. Okay, so I change it, And then once I make those changes, and again, I just go to the home tool and I can draw just like I can anywhere else. And this is why you have to be a little bit mindful of the space that you're in, because you don't really know that you're in block editing world unless you look all the way to the right and you can see that you're in the block editor. So it tells you to close the block editor. So when I click on that, I'm going to save the changes that I made to the round chair. And now you'll see that any of the blocks that were copied change. Okay, now this guy you can see didn't change because this is the one that I exploded. So once you start exploding blocks, okay, they're not connected to each other anymore. So I can get rid of this guy, and I'm going to, well, let's make a new one. Okay, so these guys are all these blocks are on layer 0, okay, and I want to change them to the furniture layer. So I'm going to go up to my layers, I'm going to select furniture, and you'll see that it turns blue, and I'm going to match the properties. Okay, and I'm going to match the properties, and so now they're all on the furniture layer. Okay, and it turns blue because those original block objects were on layer 0. So let's say I start off with, let's say my structure layer. Okay, and I create, I don't know, just something really randomly. I don't even know what I'm creating. Maybe it's a bench. Okay, something that looks like that, really quick and easy. So again, if I type in block, I'm going to name this bench. I'm going to specify my pick point, and usually in rectangular cases, I just use a midpoint as the base point. I'm going to select my objects, and I'm going to leave that all fine. I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so this is a block. Now when I go to change this to my furniture layer, okay, you'll see that if I click on it, up above, it says that it's A plan fern, okay, and it's by layer. But when I deselect it, okay, you can see that it's red. And that's the big issue with not creating the blocks on layer 0, okay, because what happens is that I drew it on the structural layer, okay, but then I assigned it to its proper furniture layer, but it's still red, okay, and in terms of line weights, as we've already seen, these are 2 different line weights, and when we go to print it out, okay, this is going to print darker than the blue. So what I can do is I can double click on the block, okay, go to OK, go back into my block editor, I can select my objects, I can change, go back to my home, go to my layers, and I can change this to 0, okay, hit escape, close my block editor, and then save the changes, and now it'll turn blue. So it might not seem like it's a big issue, but it is a big issue when you start to plot using AutoCAD. Because again, it's going to be a line weight issue, but also you'll find that you get a lot of resources, block resources from other places. And the problem with that is that a lot of them don't follow that methodology. So when you insert it into your drawing, it doesn't take on the properties of your layer. Okay, and that being mindful of that will allow you to fix that problem and have it be coordinated with your drawing. Those blocks from exterior resources. The other thing that I want to mention is that there are grouping and ungrouping objects, and I've seen some students, use that already. You are able to group and ungroup objects, but however, this is not common with working with drawings in AutoCAD and shouldn't be used in lieu of creating blocks. They do not have the ability to update other groupings of objects like the block command does, making creating blocks, as we just did, the preferred method. So not to negate the value of grouping, it does have its time and its place and can be a useful tool when applied appropriately, but it's not the same as creating blocks. Okay, so to illustrate that is if I explode this to singular objects, okay, I can type in group, and I can select those objects and hit enter. And it turns it into a group, okay, and basically a collection of objects, but I can't double click on it and edit it and change everything else like I can, with a block. Okay, so that's how the two are very, very different from each other. Okay, all this is doing is taking this collective, this collection of objects and grouping them together, but it's not creating an editable block. One that where I can change one, and they all change. Okay, so again, it's about making this process faster. And so when I group it, and I select it, it does have, its center base point, okay, which is based upon the box that it creates for this grouping of objects. Okay, and I can move it around, but I can't edit it. Okay, and if I want to ungroup it, I just type in the command ungroup, and it'll ungroup it into its separate objects.